we're on.
Every year.
I normally read my talks, but I'm not reading this.
Yeah, it's an informal group,
Yeah, I think
so
it would be silly to read.
Favorite line
yeah, it's, if you can avoid it, it'll be more engaging.
Yeah. You know, most of my, I'll explain this, but most of my library career I worked in the back room, so I think by myself. It's only in the last 5 years that I've been able to speak.
Yeah, it's a whole different ballgame.
Yeah.
But this is a very forgiving audience, and they've been sitting here, you know, all day. And, you know, I mean, you saw how the last session went. Again, it's very informal, so you can just feel comfortable.
Yeah, sounds great. I just got back from the New Jersey Library Association conference where there was one of and it was really fancy to see in Atlantic City.
Oh, interesting.
It was great.
Yeah, fun. Yeah, that kind of a platform is a lot different from this. You really do feel like every word counts.
Next week I'm going to Baltimore.
So we're just going to be a warm-up for you.
I know where he keeps the good
Now,
stuff.
John, what do you do?
I don't know what I do. Everything.
Oh, everything. Well, so what's your role here?
I'm
Don't be
the
coy.
person that catches the ball when
Oh, when he drops it?
he usually just plays hot potato with it.
Right, so you're Mr. Fix-It, or Dr. Fix-It.
His role is chief strategy officer. He does a little of everything. He's really our major strategic thinker. And we'll talk.
Okay, excellent.
He's involved in it. I think you'll enjoy it.
No.
Yeah, no, it's, this meeting, you know,
I think I was overruled by wiser heads.
Yeah.
He can do that.
well, that's how I started out with the story.
He can do that piece that we need.
Yeah.
I have tried to work bread and butter into my introductions, but I haven't succeeded so far. I'm still working on that.
I have trouble coming up with unique titles for my talks because they all basically cover the same thing.
Oh, right.
I'm speaking to a nursing conference in Portland, Maine in August, and the name of the group is INANE, I-N-A-N-E. I'm not sure exactly what it stands for. I know the I is for international, and one of the N's is nursing. So of course the title of my talk is Predatory Publishers Are INANE. Couldn't resist it.
I don't know why they would go with that.
Initialism?
Yeah,
I don't know.
it's just kind of crazy.
You don't forget it.
Not well true. It is memorable.
That's true. No, and what's really interesting is
Everybody else should be here.
Yeah.
Ladies and gentlemen, I have your attention for just a minute. Is there anyone else who would like to stand at this desk during this session? I don't want to hog it. You want to try? I will move. I will come. And it's all yours. And we are missing a couple people, but we're going to go ahead and get started because we've got lots to talk about. This has been good, right? Everybody feeling good? They're learning a lot?
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. And you love sitting in this room all day, right?
it's horrible outside.
Thanks for saying that. We know you're lying, but it was still nice.
I have to say, I do feel very fortunate that we're in this facility, and even though we're doing a lot of sitting today, we do have some options, and certainly, you know, we've got a beautiful space to roam around in between sessions. So that, I think, has been really useful. So each of our speakers since last night has referenced at least one research study. All of us have to cover this at some point, some kind of research study. And there are lots of places in that kind of work where we can go wrong. It can be complicated. It's something that all of us need to be very careful about in terms of how we report it. So our two speakers in this next session are going to tackle some of those issues. First, we have Jeffrey Beall. He is the scholarly communication librarian here at the University of Colorado. He's published widely on metadata, and he's published on scholarly publishing, if you can process that meta thing. Beall is the author of the academic blog Scholarly Open Access, which lists and reviews questionable scholarly open access publishers. And if you're not clear on exactly what that is, you will be after you hear this talk. He's going to talk to us about the importance of keeping track of predatory publishers and how we can do that and how we can use his list. He'll be followed in this session by Trevor Butterworth, who writes for Forbes.com, Harvard Business Review, New Yorker, Wall Street Journal, a bunch of other publications, and he's going to talk about how to approach research from a critical perspective. He has spent the past 8 years as an editor-at-large for Stats.org, which is a nonprofit, nonpartisan affiliate at George Mason University, and this is really what they do, looking at how science and statistics are used and sometimes abused in the media and public policy. So these two are going to sort of work together to help us think about critical thinking and some important safeguards when we're writing about scholarly publications and research. So Jeffrey, why don't you start? Take it away, and thank you so much.
Sure, thank you very much. Welcome to Colorado, everybody. Thanks for coming. I do want to explain a couple of things before I get started. First of all, my affiliation says University of Colorado, Denver, and you may not know it, but this is actually the University of Colorado, Denver here also, although they often try to hide it. They use the term University of Colorado Pipe Anschutz Medical Campus. We're actually one university with two campuses, so it's the University of Colorado University of Colorado, Denver, and it's the downtown Denver campus and the Anschutz Medical Campus, or AMC. The history of it, and I'll try to make this really quick, is previously there were two completely separate universities. There's the University of Colorado Health Sciences Center, which used to be located downtown Denver at 9th and Colorado, and then the University of Colorado at Denver. They merged in 2008 and became the University of Colorado at Denver and Health Sciences Center. And we all hated the name because it was long and because it combined a specialty with a geographical location. So then eventually they changed the name to University of Colorado, Denver, for both campuses. But then the politicians in Aurora went crazy because this is Aurora, not Denver. So they put a lot of pressure on the regents. We have a regental system that's elected. And there was a lot of going back and forth. And eventually it became the University of Colorado, Denver Pipe Anschutz Medical Campus is the official name of the university now. But over here they completely leave out the Denver part to mollify the Aurora politicians. But on the downtown campus, we still use University of Colorado, Denver. And sometimes you'll see downtown Denver campus appended. To make it even more confusing, the downtown Denver campus where I'm at is also called the Auraria campus. And this was built in the early 1970s. It was an urban renewal project. It used to be a neighborhood that they wiped out and built a campus. There's actually 3 schools there: the University of Colorado, Denver, downtown Denver campus, Metropolitan State University of Denver, and a community college, which is called the Community College of Denver. So there's 3 institutions on one campus, and they all share the same library. And I work at that library, which is called Auraria Library. I've worked there for 14 years. I've been an academic librarian for 24 years. And throughout most of my career, I sat quietly in the back room cataloging Spanish books, and I didn't bother anybody. But I've always been interested in the organization of knowledge. And I've also done a lot of reviewing for Library Journal, which is like a magazine-type journal that librarians use. We write short 175-word reviews of books that help other libraries decide whether or not they want to buy those books. There's also a publication called the Charleston Advisor that started publication in 2000, and what it does is it reviews electronic resources that libraries buy. We buy lots of databases. We actually don't buy them, we license them now. And so this product reviews them and helps libraries decide where they want to spend their money. So here are the things I'd like to cover today. We'll talk about the scholarly publishing distribution models. The traditional model you're all familiar with, the subscription model, and then there's new open access models, and there's several flavors or colors of those that we'll talk about. I'll define predatory publishers, which is my new research specialty. which I started studying in about 2009. I'll describe my work with predatory publishers, which is mostly the blog that has already been mentioned. I'll explain why predatory publishers are problematic. I also want to talk about research misconduct and scholarly metrics. And I also forgot to talk about one thing here, the ORCID ID number. I'll talk about this a little bit at the end. But this is a really cool new system for scholarly authors. The number goes with a person. And it's a 16-digit unique number that any scholar can freely sign up for. It started 2 or 3 years ago. This is mine. And the advantage of it is if you change your name, the number stays with you through your old name or your new name, like for a woman who gets married. Also, if you have a very common name, the number provides uniqueness and helps computers separate out you from other people. So I'm trying to sell this as much as I can to scholars and writers. ORCID means Online Researcher Collaborative ID. It's a member organization, it's nonprofit, and it's really, really cool. Before I even define predatory publishers, I want to start out by just giving an example of one of them and what they do. This is a slide that is part of a spam email. And this spam email is from the International Journal of Science and Advanced Technology, abbreviated as IJSAT. I'm not sure where it's from, but I think it's from India. If you talk to any researcher these days, they will tell you about the spam they get, the constant spam they get from predatory publishers. Perhaps you've gotten these as well. They harvest email addresses from .edu websites, and they constantly spam them. This is one of them. This is for a mega journal. It's actually not for a publisher. Lots of mega journals have emerged. They are, like, I call them standalone journals. They exist by themselves. They're not part of a fleet of journals that belong to a particular publisher. What this is trying to do is solicit manuscript submissions. And they use what's called the gold open access model, where the author pays upon acceptance of the manuscript. Some of the things I want to point out here are the ISSN. In a lot of the world, people think that if a journal has an ISSN, it's automatically legitimate. They think it's a sign of a mark of quality. It's not true at all. Pretty much any journal can get an ISSN. So this one has that. Another thing, and this is actually the most egregious component of this, is submissions due July 27th, notification of acceptance July 29th, publishing date July 31st. There's clearly no peer review going on here. They're accepting the papers. They send out an acceptance notice. A person goes to PayPal and pays the fee, and then the paper is published. They also brag about their indexing here. IJSAT is indexed in DOAJ, which is a directory of open access journals, Index Copernicus, Nuger, CiteSeer, Get Cited, Google Scholar, etc. They know that scholars want to publish in journals that are indexed in the top abstracting and indexing services, so they always try to sell themselves by bragging about that. And finally, the last thing I want to point about this is that they use the term international. In much of Asia, academics get more credit for publishing in an international journal than they do for publishing in a regional or national one. So most of the predatory publishers' journals have the word international in the title, or something similar, something like a geographical component, which I'll talk about a little bit in a minute. Here's another spam. This is a screenshot of an email. This one advertises 2 journals, the Asia Pacific Journal of Research and the International Journal of World Research. This one, it's yeah, broad coverage. They accept anything. Good point. This one, to us, it looks pretty shabby. But if English isn't your first language, it's harder to make that judgment. And if you're an emerging scholar or a young scholar in a developing country, it's even harder. But some of the things I notice here are, the broad scope. The use of free emails for editorial purposes is another one of the criteria that I use. Features of journal. This confused me at first. It should be journals, but they often don't use the plural correctly. Number 1 here, where it says impact factor, that's completely bogus. Neither of these journals has an impact factor, which is a scholarly metric that measures the impact of individual journals. So they're lying. It's a complete and total lie. And they also have, it's only $100 to publish in these, or if you happen to be from India, where these are from, 1,800 rupees.
Doesn't this make you want to publish stuff in it willy-nilly just for fun?
No. The journalists can get away with that, and journalists do that, but if you're a researcher, there's ethical considerations and you don't want to do that, because many times they ask you to warrant that your work is original and honest and everything like that. So journalists do sting operations, but I don't encourage researchers to do it. In fact, there's a very famous sting operation that was published in Science magazine in October 2013 by John Bohannon, and he used my list as a source and randomly went out and submitted a bogus paper to a whole bunch of them and saw how many accepted it. And it was 82% of the journals on my list accepted the bogus science article. So also, yeah, every month, 25th, journal will be published, sent article on or before the 20th of every month. So 5-day turnaround time for these. Now, this is not a screenshot of an email. It's actual screenshot of a website. This one is called, the publisher is called JSciMed Central, and they publish a fleet of journals. I think it's about 35 journals. The thing about this one is I can't tell where they're really from. These two addresses are bogus. These are dummy addresses. The one on the left, the Delaware address, is the address of the Harvard Business Services, which is a business and corporation company in Delaware. And I think whoever this is used that address, they're using that address as like a mail forwarding service. The one on the right is a mail forwarding service. It's Market Street Shipping in San Diego. So I can't figure out, these are the two addresses they give on their website. I know these aren't where they're really located. They won't say where they're located. It could be, Pakistan is my best guess, but I'm not sure.
Did you call the numbers to see what those numbers, the telephone numbers?
Yeah, it goes directly to voicemail.
Oh.
It says leave a message. Another thing I want to point about this publisher is the name of it, JSciMed Central. I don't know if you're familiar with Biomed Central. That's a legitimate open access publisher. And there's also PubMed Central, which is run by the National Library of Medicine. So they're trying to sound like that. JSciMed Central, PubMed Central, Biomed Central. They're trying to steal some of the legitimacy from the legitimate publishers and digital repositories and use it here to get authors to submit their manuscripts, and then they'll charge them to publish them. Okay, so here's about the distribution models for scholarly publishing. The traditional model you're all familiar with. It's also called the subscription model. We've had it for hundreds of years. It still exists. It doesn't have to be print. It can be print or online. And the traditional model was reader focused, was customer focused. You sold a subscription. You had to keep people happy or they would cancel their subscriptions. So also it had a very strong validation function, especially when it was print, because there's only so many articles you can put in an issue. So you had to accept only the very best because you had strong space limitations in the print world. That's not true in the online world. But in the traditional model, this functioned as a very effective quality control filter. Only the best articles could be published. And then in 2002, along came the open access movement. There were 3 meetings, one in Budapest, one in Bethesda, and one in Berlin in 2002. They're called the 3B meetings. And that's when the open access movement, which is a social movement, when it was like formally got going. It's still going. It hasn't been completely successful. There's still lots of journals published on the traditional model. But there's an increasing number of open access journals that are freely available to anybody in the world. So let's see, the gold open access model. This is the model that is described, that the publishers I showed you a minute ago use. The gold open access model works by charging a fee to the authors upon acceptance of their manuscript, and then it's free to the readers. So gold open access is a fee charged to authors, free to readers. The charges are now called the article processing charge, or APC. That's the conventional term. So I have APC here. The green open access model is a little bit different. This model works on open access repositories. In this model, you submit a paper to a traditional journal, and it gets published in the traditional journal, but the journal grants rights to the author to archive his or her work in an open access digital repository. The work is not the final PDF that's published in the journal. It's what's called a preprint, and the preprint is the last Word version that you send to the journal before it's published. So it's before copy editing, before it's formatted into the PDF, but it is after peer review. So it's a different version of the final copy. It gets published in an open access repository, that we can have a repository at your university, or there can be disciplinary repositories. For example, social sciences has a repository, library science has its own repository, and they publish a lot of these what are called preprints. The problem with, there's lots of problems with the green open access model. One of the problems is that a lot of publishers won't allow it. They won't allow the final PDF to be done. And also many impose an embargo period. So you might have to wait a year or 6 months before you can put your preprint in the repository. Another problem is that not very many people do it. You get your paper published, and it's extra work to submit the preprint to the repository, and a lot of people just don't do it. If you hear about open access mandates, this is one of the things that they try to get people to do, is to mandate them to put their work in the open access repository, but still there's not a high compliance rate for that. I also use the term platinum open access. A lot of other people don't use this term, but I like it. Platinum means free to the reader and free to the author. So it's completely open access and there's no charge to the author. That way there's no conflict of interest. One of the problem with the gold open access model is that there's a big conflict of interest, because the more articles the publisher accepts, the more money it makes. So everybody wants to make more money, so we'll accept that. They want to make as much money as they can. But platinum open access is usually funded by associations or organizations, and they completely subsidize the publishing, so it's free to the author, free to the reader. There's a lot of journals that operate using this model, and it's great because there's no conflict of interest. The big deal in libraries, the publishers, the subscription publishers aren't stupid. They know that the open access movement is out there. They don't want everything to be open access because they make more money with the subscription model. So what they've done is they've changed the way they market journals to libraries. They sell them to us, and they license them to us in packages now. So you get a big bundle of journals. We now have more access to more journals than we ever did in the past because of these big deals. Okay, so by definition, predatory publishers are those that they use the gold open access model, and as I indicated, they have a conflict of interest that's built into the model. The more papers means more income from them. I do need to clarify that not all open access journals are bad. Not all the traditional ones are good. There's bad traditional journals, and there are some excellent open access journals.
Who are some of the bad traditional journals?
The open access advocates will tell you that Elsevier is bad because their profits are so high, and because there was a scandal a few years ago in which they published a bunch of articles in bogus journals that they created just to please some drug companies. So they made a really dumb mistake, and that mistake gets cited over and over and over again by the open access advocates. Monetary transactions are between authors and publishers are fraught with troubles. I think this is the source of all the problems with the gold open access model, is you have authors paying publishers. In the traditional model, there's never any exchange of money between the author and the publisher, except in the case of a few society publishers, like scholarly societies, where they charged really modest page fees or page charges, especially if you had something that was in color that increased the printing costs. They would charge you a page charge. One other thing I wanted to talk about is what's called the hybrid model, and it's not on the slide here, but hybrid means a traditional journal that also allows open access if the author pays a fee. Elsevier does this with most of its 2,000 journals that are toll access or the traditional model. The author can pay $3,000, and then the journal, strike that, the article is made open access in perpetuity. Very few people take them up on that, though, unfortunately. So here's how predatory publishers operate, and we've already seen a little bit of it. They lie. They're basically counterfeit publishers. They're often one-man operations. They're oriented towards the authors because the authors are their customers, not the readers anymore. The readers or the subscribers were the customers in the past, and those are the ones you wanted to keep happy. Now you want to keep the authors happy, and what do the authors want? They want easy and fast publication. I mean, if you're a researcher, that's what you want. You want it to be as easy as possible and as quick as possible. Unfortunately, the customers of the predatory publishers include people who are fooled by them because they're very good at fooling people. They try to look like legitimate publishers, and very often they're successful at fooling people. So I get emails all the time from people that when they realize that they've just been taken in by a publisher, they do a Google search, they find my list on Google, and send me an email, what should I do? And it's a really hard question to answer because sometimes they've already signed over their copyright to the publisher. And they want to withdraw it and resubmit it to another journal, and it gets extremely messy. So they're victims, but there's also people that use the predatory publishers basically as vanity presses, and they use them to get quick and easy publications. So there's some of that going on as well. Where are they located? Mostly in Asia and Africa, but there's also a lot in the UK, Ontario province, Australia, and here in the US. There's a lot based here in the US as well. They also operate bogus conferences. There's a lot of money to be made in conferences. You charge your registration fee. They're often held in resort venues like Orlando or Las Vegas. And then you charge them for the registration for the conference. They present a paper, and then the company will charge them again the article processing charge to publish their paper in the journal. So they're making money hand over foot. We already saw the journals with the broad coverage. There's tons and tons of journals with broad coverage. They also have journal titles that are similar to legitimate journal titles. They might change one or two words, but they do it to try and trick people into thinking that it's the legitimate journal. I should talk about spam. They're very good at spamming the authors. We saw just some general spam here, but they also use what I call personalized spam. What they do is they'll email an author a personal email, and they say, "We read your article, blah, 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 and we found it excellent. We'd like to invite you to submit another article to us." And if you're a young researcher or a postdoc, or you're just out of graduate school, that can be really effective as a strategy to get people to submit papers to them. And that's what they want. They want you to submit papers so they can make the money off of you. And I hear a lot about that, about how people are fooled, how they pander to young scholars and exploit their weaknesses and get them, by praising them, and get them to submit papers.
Aren't scholars being educated about or proper journals? It's not.
No, I still find people who have never heard of predatory publishers. I still get emails from them, from people who have never heard of them. Most scholars are so busy they don't have time. They're so focused on their fields that they don't have time to really to learn about scholarly publishing or publishing in general. So people are still getting fooled by it all the time. Lately, I've noticed the emergence of what I call bogus metrics companies or misleading metrics companies. There are lots of legitimate scholarly metrics, and the impact factor is one. Now there are, I think, about 15 or 20 bogus metrics companies, and I have the logos of 3 of them here. Advanced Science Index, Site Factor, and International Science Indexing. Now, the company that produces the legitimate impact factor is Thomson Reuters, based in Philadelphia. And the impact factors come out of a proprietary product called Journal Citation Reports. And every year it releases the new impact factors for all the journals it covers. Not all journals have impact factors. It takes 3 years to get one, if you're lucky. So no brand new journals have an impact factor. So these companies have solved this. These are all from India, I think, and they've all they're just basically one website, and they will sell journals an impact factor. And then the journals put that impact factor on their website to attract authors. But when the journals do that, they often have these symbols, but a lot of the authors don't know the difference. So this is fooling people on a massive scale, and this just started last year. The company that originally, or the organization that originally started the impact factor about 50 years ago was called ISI. I forget what it stands for. Anyway, so this one, International Scientific Indexing, is copying the initialism of that. So it's particularly dangerous. Another thing that I get a lot of emails about are what I call article promotion companies. And these are companies that they produce these glossy magazines featuring somebody's research. So they do a lot of spamming. And you get the spam and then you reply to them, and they'll charge you like $3,000, and they'll feature your research. They'll have somebody write it up like a magazine article about your research. There's nothing wrong with this. It's not illegal. But I just question whether it's a good idea for scholars to pay these companies to promote their research. Anyway, Lambert is a German imprint, and what they do is they spam authors, so I get a lot of email about them. It's called LAP, Lambert Academic Publishing, and what they want to do is they want you to sign over the copyright of your thesis or dissertation to them, and then they try and sell it on Amazon. And nothing wrong with it. It's not illegal, but I question whether that's really the best thing for somebody, because it basically locks up your research forever. You give away the copyright of your thesis or dissertation, and then it's behind their paywall. And the only way to get it is to buy it from Amazon. And you yourself can't even do anything with it because you've signed over the copyright. Finally, hijack journals. This is brand new, and I just started a list of these this year. There's about a dozen on it. A hijack journal is when somebody creates a bogus website for a legitimate journal, starts spamming and accepting articles and taking the money, the article processing charges from people. A lot of these are based in Mauritius, I think, and there's also some based in Iran. And they're ripping people off right and left. They make these authentic-looking websites that copy the identity of a legitimate journal. Sometimes they're print journals that have not gone online yet, and they make an online presence for them, spam, and take in the money. They accept everything because they don't care. So now I'll quickly talk about my work with predatory publishers. I first became interested in predatory publishers in 2009 when I started getting a whole bunch of spam emails asking me to submit papers. I coined the term predatory publisher 4 years ago. I have 4 lists on my blog now, actually. The predatory publishers, the predatory standalone journals, misleading metrics, and hijack journals. And I also write 2 blog posts a week of commentary. I also do need to say my work has been far from perfect. I've made a lot of mistakes. I always anger the open access advocates who don't want to hear anything negative about open access. So it hasn't been perfect, but it's been a great ride. Most of my career, as I said, I was in the back room just quietly cataloging Spanish books. And I was a library cataloger for my entire career until 2012. This is what my blog looks like. It's called Scholarly Open Access. The URL is scholarlyoa.com. The links to the publishers are list of publishers on the top and list of standalone journals. That's the heart of the site. The university lawyer maybe put in a disclaimer. I'm on a first-name basis with the university lawyer because the publishers have threatened to sue me a few times. None is actually. Pardon?
Have you actually been sued?
Have not been sued yet, just threats. And then one said he was going to sue me for $1 billion. This was an Indian-based publisher. And so, of course, as soon as I got the letter, the FedEx letter in my office, this is great. And I went right to the Chronicle of Higher Education, and they did a story on it. Because how can you resist doing a story on somebody saying they're going to sue somebody for $1 billion? But what I've learned about these I've learned the difference between a threatened lawsuit and an actual lawsuit, and I've realized there's a big difference between a threat and the real thing. And so what happens is there'll be like 1 million emails from a lawyer somewhere, and there'll be back and forth between the university lawyer and the publisher's lawyer, and then it will die. It'll completely stop. And the university lawyer says it's because they went through their retainer, and they don't want to continue. So in terms of identifying which are the predatory publishers and which are not, I've published a criteria that's on my blog also. This was published in 2012. It's the one I still use. The main things that I look at are lack of transparency, hiding information conventionally given by publishers, and deception, intentional deception, and not following scholarly publishing industry standards. In general, those are the three main things that I look at. When we saw that publisher earlier that said you submit the papers on July 27th and it's published on July 30th, most of the cases are like that. Most of the judgments are really easy because they're so bad. So I use this kind of continuum here to illustrate this. The predatory ones here, Most of them, it's really obvious that they're predatory. Everybody agrees. There's almost no disagreement. And same with the not predatory ones. There's a few in the middle. I don't know if they're predatory or not. Often there could be new publishers that are a little sloppy when they start up. They don't have any criminal intent. Those I endeavor not to add to the list. I don't want to hurt an honest upstart's attempt to start a scholarly journal or scholarly publisher. So for most of the ones on my list are the worst on the worst. The worst of the worst, the ones on the right side here. And I don't want to include the others. I don't want to hurt anybody. There's a lot of reasons why predatory publishers are problematic. They've ruined the open access movement, I think. They've given it a bad name. I don't have statistics to back this up, but I think that predatory publishing overall has increased the amount of published research misconduct. There's no studies that have measured this, and it's a great research question. I would love to do a study, but I don't know how to study it. They threaten demarcation and the cumulative nature of research. Demarcation is the line between authentic science and pseudoscience, and peer review's role is to demarcate those two things. So anything that is not authentic science should not be published in an authentic scholarly journal, and peer review should catch it. And most of the time it does. It's not a perfect system. There's a really good article in Wikipedia about demarcation that explains it really well. Bogus research has affected societal institutions, and the four that I use as examples are the press, because the press often reports on published research; law, because lawyers use published research when they litigate cases in court; public policy makers use published research to make public policy; and finally, clinical medicine translates research into clinical practice. So all of these four societal institutions rely on research. And the predatory publishers, I think, are threatening that, because the predatory publishers are publishing a lot of bogus science because they accept anything and they don't have a very good peer review.
There are 567 publications on your list?
Publishers?
There are predatory publishers, yeah.
Is that what you got?
Yeah.
Okay, because it was like 470 at the turn of the year. I count it once a year. When I started in 2010, I think it was like 18, something like that. And I never expected this to happen. I had no idea that they would explode in the way that they have. The predatory conferences. Now, because of open access, the general public has access to bad science. It's free because it's open access. It's free. Anybody can access it, including the general public. But the general public doesn't have the credentials or the ability to distinguish solid science from pseudoscience. And they can think that pseudoscience is actually legitimate science because it's in a journal, it's in a scholarly journal, it looks pretty good, looks like a regular journal, it's branded as science. They don't back up their content. This is a reference to digital preservation. All the top journals will pay to have their content redundantly backed up. It's a very important part of knowledge management. Most of these guys just have their content on one server and that's it. And there are some cooperative organizations. There's one called LOCKS, Lots of Copies Keep Stuff Safe, that libraries use and a lot of publishers use. But most of the predatory publishers have no digital preservation policies or practices, and they don't devote any resources to it.
That's good though, right? Since it's bad science, at least it'll go away.
Yeah, that's one way to look at it. But it's bad if you're the author because you've paid to have somebody host your content forever. But it's going to be gone. These are screenshots from, the two on the left are screenshots from my blog, different blog posts that I did. The top one, I followed up on a blog post from another scientist. FWS is Fish and Wildlife Service officials used a predatory journal to publish questionable science. What I'm trying to illustrate here is that people have a pseudoscientific agenda, and they publish it as an article in a predatory journal, and then they will go to the press and try to get the press to report on it. And that's what's happened in these two cases here. And actually, in the top case, they tried to say that the range of this bug was small so that the Keystone Pipeline would not affect it at all. But most of the scientists believe that the range is actually larger. So the people that published this went to a predatory journal to publish it to show that, to make the range look smaller. This one was really fascinating. this was by some anti-nuclear activists, and they wrote an article that was published in a Chinese predatory publisher based in the U.S. that said that the Fukushima nuclear fallout has increased the rate of congenital hypothyroidism in babies in the West Coast, specifically California. And there's a whole bunch of scientists are saying that this is not true at all. Even some anti-nuclear scientists are questioning the science in this. So one of the scientists contacted me. I mean, I'm not qualified to evaluate the science itself. And so based on her input, I wrote this blog post. And they also did a video about it. This blog post has a video at the end that's 13 minutes long, but it's really, really good, and it completely destroys this article. And the predatory publisher refused to publish a letter to the editor from the scientists that were questioning this author, this article, and they only said that they would publish a paper if she paid the regular fee for a new paper. The one on the right, this one is about sea level. There's a group of people that are combating global warming by saying that the sea level is not rising. And so they published this article in a journal called the Pattern Recognition in Physics, which was in a publisher, an open access publisher that was not on my list. And I did a blog post about it. And then what the publisher did was really good. They canceled the journal. They canceled it completely. But then the editors of the journal went and started their own open access journal with the exact same name somewhere else. So Pattern Recognition in Physics still exists. It's just moved from this legitimate publisher to being a standalone journal now. And they mostly talk about that there's no sea level rise. So that's mostly what I have about predatory publishers. I did want to talk about scholarly metrics. We've already mentioned the impact factor. There's an increasing amount of attention being paid to scholarly metrics. They can measure the journal, the researcher, and the article. You'll hear the term alt metrics, alt for alternative metrics. The impact factor has reigned for many, many years. It seems that its reign is coming to an end, that just measuring the journals so much is not what people want. We also want to measure other things. So when I say the article, they'll count what are called attention metrics, the number of downloads, the number of comments, the number of Facebook mentions. ORCID, Online Researcher Collaborative ID, it's a 16-digit number. This is a really good thing. Alt metrics, I already mentioned, attention metrics. Abstracting and indexing services. These are companies that index content in journals. I'm not really sure why I put that there. A lot of the predatory publishers will claim to be included in abstracting and indexing services when they're not. The big ones are Scopus and EBSCO and Web of Knowledge are the ones that we use here. Just a few things before I close. Retraction Watch. Has anybody heard of that? Yeah, it's the name of a blog that documents article retractions in scholarly journals. And all the scholars subscribe to this. Everybody watches. They want to see who got their paper pulled from the journal. It's kind of like the water cooler of science. It's really fascinating to read it. Using predatory journals to promote bogus science. Sort of talked about that already, but I just want to let you know that people will do that, and then they'll try and come to you and sell you their article as on a science when it may not be on a science. It may not, if it's published in a predatory journal, it might not have gone through the proper quality control that science normally goes through, and it might be a completely bogus or pseudoscientific article, so be wary of that. I already said many people don't even know about predatory publishers. Many honest scholars don't. And increase in academic misconduct, and examples of that include data and image manipulation. People will change the image to make it match the conclusion that they want to promote. And I think there's an increasing amount of plagiarism in scholarly articles. I see it all the time in the predatory journals. It's just everywhere. And before I close, I just wanted to give another example, a couple more examples. This is 3 selections from a website. This is a brand new predatory publisher. It's the Council for Innovative Research. Notice the really official sounding name that they gave. I mean, this is probably 2 guys in a garage is really what it is. They launched one day with all of these journals, and thanks to templates and cascading style sheets, They were able to make a homepage for each one of these journals. I like to look at typos in the journal titles, and I found this one here, Journal of Advances in Veterinary. So it's an ungrammatical title, and I often see these in predatory publishers. These, some of these were born with an impact factor, which is impossible, because the impact factor is based on how many citations the average article in the journal has received. And since these are brand new, they can't have had any citations yet. But this company is saying that some of their journals have impact factors. In fact, this one is even saying that they will sell them to other publishers. They'll sell impact factors to other publishers' journals. Finally, the layout of this is an open source journal management system. So anybody in the world can download this for free and use it. And it comes from Simon Fraser University in BC. It's called Open Journal Systems. And lots of predatory publishers use this system. And I can tell by the layout that that's what they're using. Notice that the journal titles are all broad too. Journal of Advances in Nursing, Pharmacy, Psychology, Zoology, and so that more articles will fall in the scope of each journal, and they'll be able to make more money by accepting more papers. And I always end with this, the International Journal of Nuts and Related Sciences. Thanks. Thank you, and I hope I haven't gone over into Trevor's time.